A quote-exclusive report by the Washington Post, the wife of a Supreme Court justice was discovered to have been covertly accepting payments from a group that held a vested interest in a case currently under review by the court. These payments, which were made by conservative judicial activist Leonard Leo, were linked to the Federalist Society, a group with which Leo is associated. The justice's wife provided consulting services, but requested that her name not appear on any invoices. This information was reported by the Post in January of 2012. According to documents, it has been revealed that Leonard Leo, a prominent figure in a network of non-profit organizations supporting the appointment of conservative judges, instructed GOP pollster Kellyanne Conway to invoice a non-profit group he advises. The funds from this invoice were then used to pay Virginia Jenny Thomas. This occurred in the same year that the non-profit, the Judicial Education Project, submitted a brief to the Supreme Court in a significant voting rights case. Leo specifically requested that Conway give Jenny Thomas an additional $25,000 and instructed that her name not appear on any paperwork related to the transaction. To accomplish this, Conway issued a $25,000 bill to Leo's nonprofit organization and listed the purpose as a supplement for Constitution polling and opinion consulting. According to the Washington Post, the total amount of money involved in this matter appears to exceed six figures. The documents reviewed by the Post revealed that between June 2011 and June 2012, the polling company paid Liberty Consulting, Thomas's firm, a total of $80,000. The company anticipated making an additional payment of $20,000 by the end of 2012. However, the nature of the work that Thomas performed for either the Judicial Education Project or the polling company is not explicitly stated in the documents. It is not surprising that the revelations about Thomas extend to his wife receiving such backdoor deals, but this particular instance is particularly noteworthy. The situation has crossed a significant threshold, and further developments remain to be seen. It is ironic that despite the blatant corruption revealed in this situation, it is unlikely that anyone will be held accountable. However, if there were a corruption trial, I would be most interested in whether or not Thomas's company actually provided any services for the organizations that paid her. My suspicion is that she did little to no work as an opinion consultant, a title that seems like a convenient cover for funneling money to her. This appears to be an outright bribery of a Supreme Court justice's wife, with the funds going directly into Clarence Thomas's pocket. His request to leave her name out of the paperwork suggests an intent to conceal this bribery. This situation has truly crossed the Rubicon. While it is no secret that the rest of the situation was also corrupt, in a hypothetical world where those in power in the United States were ever held accountable, it is possible that a corruption trial could take place. The payments made to Clarence Thomas and his wife were extensive, including gifts such as vacations and amounts totaling millions of dollars. The payments made to Thomas's wife for opinion consulting services were essentially bribes, as evidenced by the request to keep the transactions secret. It is disingenuous to claim that these were simply friendly gestures. The request to keep the transaction secret was not a matter of discretion, as in the Larry David episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where a donation is made anonymously. Rather, it was an act of blatant bribery intended to shift policy, install power, and hear cases with a conflict of interest. The group that Kellyanne Conway discussed with Adrian, the Judicial Educational Project, filed a brief in front of the Supreme Court, and Clarence Thomas overheard it. While the Thomases did not respond to the revelations, Leonard Leo did make a statement that was quoted in the Washington Post article. In it, he stated that he had been friends with the Thomases since 1990 and was aware of how vicious and gossipy people could be. The statement made by Leo in the Washington Post article emphasized his commitment to protecting the privacy and safety of the Thomases, who have been his friends since 1990. Leo expressed concern about the current climate of violence and harassment, citing the attempted assassination of Justice Kavanaugh outside his home while his wife and daughters were present. He suggested that those behind these actions seek to force Clarence Thomas to resign so that President Biden could replace him with a nominee of his choosing. Jenny Thomas, who had worked with the Heritage Foundation and in the Reagan administration, was a contractor for Leo and had provided public policy services. The polling company and Kellyanne Conway had no legitimate business before the court, and the Judicial Education Project that Leo was advising definitely filed a brief in front of the Supreme Court, as confirmed by the Post in December 2012. The Judicial Education Project submitted an amicus brief in the case of Shelby County v. Holder, which challenged a key civil rights law that sought to protect minority voters. The Supreme Court ultimately struck down a provision of the Voting Rights Act that had determined which states had to receive federal clearance before changing their voting rules and procedures. Clarence Thomas was part of the 5-4 majority in this decision, and he issued a concurring opinion in which he argued that the pre-clearance requirements themselves were unconstitutional. Thomas's opinion, which was consistent with an earlier opinion he had written, aligned with the outcome advocated for by the Judicial Education Project and several other conservative organizations in their amicus briefs. However, he did not explicitly cite the Judicial Education Project brief in his opinion. Regardless of whether or not Clarence Thomas cited the amicus brief submitted by the Judicial Education Project in his opinion, as someone who has clerked for a chief judge in the Court of Appeals, I can attest to the significant influence that judges have with their colleagues. They can lobby and sway each other during conferences, pushing for the ruling they desire over a period of months. If there was some kind of agreement between the Thomases and the outside Judicial Education Project to ensure that this aspect of the Voting Rights Act was not upheld and preserved, it is possible that Thomas leveraged his position to secure a 5-4 ruling in their favor. Additionally, the timing of the payments made to Jenny Thomas is concerning. The Judicial Education Project paid her $100,000 just a few months before the Supreme Court adjudicated the Shelby County v. Holder case, suggesting that the court likely had the case pending before them when the last payment was made. This timing raises concerns of impropriety that should have compelled further investigation. The corruption and conflicts of interest involved in this situation are clear. When a group pays a Supreme Court justice's wife, and that justice then casts the deciding vote in a case involving that same group, it is not remotely acceptable. Any judge would tell you that this is not permissible, and at a minimum, Clarence Thomas should have recused himself. If Thomas were not a Supreme Court justice, there would almost certainly be proceedings against him for such conduct. It is truly outrageous. Additionally, a member of our team made an excellent point last night when we were covering another corruption story involving Clarence Thomas. It is crucial for judges to avoid even the appearance of corruption. The situation with Clarence Thomas and his wife is not only the appearance of corruption, but corruption itself. Kellyanne Conway's excuses, such as Jenny Thomas being a serious person who also works at the Heritage Foundation, are not valid. The Heritage Foundation is also funded by donors like Harlan Crow, who funnel even more money to Thomas. The need for secrecy in their dealings is a clear indication of their awareness of the impropriety of their actions. It is important to note that these stories are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the issue of money in politics. Who paid for Brett Kavanaugh's baseball tickets, and who paid for his house? The records show that he did not have enough to buy his home in Maryland. The lavish trips and yacht excursions provided to Clarence and Jenny Thomas by Harlan Crow further highlight the need for reform in our political system. The information we currently have is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to corruption within the Supreme Court. Neil Gorsuch, only 9 days after being sworn in, sold his property to affirm a case before the court and witnessed corruption with John Roberts, who is supposed to be a moderate justice. However, we don't know much else beyond this. Sheldon Whitehouse, a Democratic senator, highlighted that when Scalia was on the court, he took over 70 trips paid for by Republican donors, but we only know about 2 of them. It appears that Supreme Court justices have been bribed by business interests for decades, and when attempts are made to regulate them, they respond with the excuse that they are all bribed. The justices even sent a letter saying they wouldn't do anything about the corruption. This behavior is outrageous, and it's hard to believe that they keep taking money and deciding cases for those who bribe them. Additionally, the claim that the corruption allegations are a political hit job to replace Clarence Thomas is unfounded. Due to Dianne Feinstein's illness and absence from the Senate, the Democrats can't even attempt to replace Clarence Thomas, despite their deep incompetence. Feinstein should have resigned years ago, but like many other longtime politicians, she clings to power. The truth is, there's no chance they will replace Thomas. We are merely looking for some level of accountability, such as recusing oneself when one's spouse receives bribes. The Supreme Court justices refuse to do even that, continuing to accept bribes without consequence. It's ironic that one justice's wife was involved in the effort to overturn Biden's win on January 6th. It's possible that the IRS could hold these corrupt individuals accountable for their actions. If they fail to properly log and register things on receipts, the IRS could potentially catch them for bribery. This may be why Republicans seek to defund and eliminate the IRS altogether.